to another program of The Public Interest. I am Malaika Ramsey. Thanks for joining us. This week we focus again on the National Assembly as it relates to Budget 2013, consideration of the estimates, and a recent ruling that was somewhat in favor of the opposition. Now, Speaker Raphael Trotman recently ruled that it is constitutional for the opposition to cut, or I should say reduce, the budget. With me, as always, is the Brigadier the Honorable David Granger, opposition leader and leader of the People's National Congress Reform. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you, Malaika.
All right. Now, as I said before, we've seen a busy week, the previous week, a busy one in the National Assembly regarding the 2013 budget. First off, sir, after the Speaker had ruled, yourself, and it was some sentiments from other members of a Partnership for National Unity, that ruling that it was okay, or it was the cutting of the budget was allowed, you mentioned that it somewhat brought back or supported democracy in the National Assembly. Would you like to expound on those sentiments?
Well, that is correct. We didn't feel that at any time that there was any jeopardy. Naturally, the matter had to go through due process. It went through the High Court and the Speaker deliberated on it. But it is quite clear that in other jurisdictions like ours, the National Assembly does have the authority to reduce. We're quite clear that the National Assembly cannot increase the allocation because we don't raise taxes. And we cannot insert items on the budget which are not there. You know, if, for example, nothing is provided for, child care, we cannot insert an element in the budget on such a head. But we were quite confident all along that we had the right to reduce the budget. And we were very satisfied that the Speaker's statement confirmed that position. So we feel that it is a landmark decision in the sense that it reinforces our parliamentary democracy, because the whole basis of the budget cut, the whole basis of the performance of the opposition is on the basis of the number of votes in the National Assembly. And this is the battle that the People's Progressive Party Civic had with us, for the last 15 months, when we dealt with the composition of the committees, for example. Naturally, when the PPP was in a majority, it held a majority, and now the opposition is in a majority. The opposition holds, the majority number of votes. So this is the way it always works. And the decision this week that the opposition could cut the budget is in the same vein. So I don't think there's need for congratulation, but there's certainly need to acknowledge the reaffirmation of the principle of majority rule in the National Assembly. It's a good move because the PPP, I think, had been trying to destabilize the opposition for the last 15 months by running to the court, and everybody is jittery. How will the court rule? But it is very clear now that democracy will prevail, or has prevailed, and that the opposition will continue to operate as a majority in the National Assembly. We're not the government, we know that, but we intend to make every vote count.
I'm going to come back to the High Court in a bit, but before I do that, you've since the ruling, and I know even after the ruling, the Speaker would have said that a budget shouldn't be cut just for cutting's sake, and APNU and David Granger would have been accused of wanting power. You want the authority to cut, to remind people that, look, we are the opposition, we are the majority, let's cut. Your thoughts, sir?
Well, there are several reasons for cutting. In the case of NCN, we made it clear that the NCN was behaving in an unprofessional manner, and that we would not support the type of scurrility that is published by GINA or Chronicle, or that is published by the NCN. So one is to make it clear that the people's will, the majority will, is on the side of good governance. It's on the side of professional conduct on the part of government institutions. And if the institutions do not behave in a professional manner, there will be no funds. in the case of NCN in particular, they used to attack, or they attack members of the opposition, and there's no reason why we should pay a state agency to attack us. In other instances, for example, the Sugar Corporation and the Power Company, we asked for those entities to be restructured. Since last year, we asked for them to be restructured because they're loss-making. And it is no point pumping money into companies which refuse to reform their structures. In the budget speech by Dr. Singh, in the presentation on Gaisuko alone, half a dozen times, he mentioned management or managerial problems. So there's no point blaming the opposition, there's no point blaming the workers. The Minister of Finance himself knows that the problems lie with management. There is too much political control, and there is not enough professional direction of that sugar corporation. We said we will not support further subventions until and unless a study is done to determine how those corporations will become profitable. So when we cut, it is not whimsical or capricious, as the lawyers like to say. It is something that we have carefully examined. We have a parliamentary group of 26 parliamentarians. We meet and we deliberate on these matters before we make cuts. Now, in the case of Home Affairs, now, any school child knows that you can pick up the newspapers during the course of a week in Guyana and see truck overturning in the hinterland, vehicle accidents, armed robberies, piracy, banditry, all sorts of criminality taking place. And we took the decision based on the evidence of the performance of Mr. Rohi for over 6 years as Minister of Home Affairs, that he's not a fit and proper person to run that ministry. Perhaps he can be given tourism or some other thing to do. But we did not have confidence in his ability to run the Ministry of Home Affairs. And the National Assembly brought a motion, I brought a motion, and it is now in the form of a resolution. The National Assembly resolved that it had no confidence. How could we vote money? How could we put money? How can we provide resources to a minister in whom we have no confidence? It was a contradiction. It would be a contradiction in terms. So we continue to, APNU that is, to support cuts, not to harm any policemen, not to harm the working people in those organizations, policemen, firemen, prison officers, not to harm security. But we were supportive of cuts which would remove funding from what is called the Citizen Security Program. Now, we must understand the complexity of the security sector, the public security sector. What has happened here is that the government, over the last 13 years or so, has studiously ignored reforming the parts of the police force which can bring about a reduction in crime, the violent crime particularly, armed robberies, contraband smuggling, trafficking in persons, banditry, piracy. Now, the plan that has been put before the public, the people of Guyana, is what is called a Citizen Security Program. It is not new. Funding was provided 6 or 7 years ago by the IDB. So it is really a continuing program. Now, the British firm Capita Simmons has produced a report which Mr. Rohi had for 2 years, before making it public. Now, if it is such a good report, and if it's so necessary, why hold a report for, nearly 2 years, maybe 22 months? So when we looked at this report, we saw that it emphasized not prevention or trying to stop gun running or narco trafficking. It is about public relations. It is about administration. It is about career planning. So there were some other things like improvement of the police stations, refurbishing of police stations and so on. But essentially, the programs that we refused to support were not programs that could have brought an end to the criminal violence that we are seeing in this country. What we have as a murder rate in 2012 is almost the same as we had in the heyday of the escapees, in the heyday of Feynman and Dale Moore and these other criminals. So we did not make a whimsical decision. We did not take a whimsical decision to simply cut. It was a judicious decision that Mr. Rohi is not a fit and proper person, and the plan that he advanced is not the plan that we need to resolve public security issues in this country.
As we're on the Home Affairs Ministry, sir, but APNU did not institute any cuts of its own, and of course we know during the estimates for the Home Affairs Ministry, no questions were posed to that minister by the opposition, as in APNU. Could you explain?
Well, we had several meetings with Alliance for Change, and we actually had meetings with the President along with Alliance for Change. So we are aware of the motions to make cuts to the budget. Now, the National Assembly works in such a way that you cannot simply stand on the floor and make a cut. You have to submit a motion, and when that motion is moved, it will be examined and it will be voted on. So we were aware that the Alliance for Change had submitted motions, and we decided to support those motions. Okay. So we did not need to submit motions of our own because they would simply duplicate. You know, the National Assembly cannot entertain two motions, two separate motions on the same topic. You know, I can't have a motion that that you must cut $10, and AFC has a motion to cut $10, and we both have a collision in the National Assembly. So APNU made a conscious decision to support the proposed cuts, and that was put before the House, and APNU took a principled position to support the cuts, and that's exactly what we did. AFC took a different line, but APNU took a principled position, and we supported the cuts that were before the National Assembly, and that is what happened.
Do you see any danger in not cutting from that particular program, allowing monies to go toward that?
Well, we did not want that outcome. Okay. We wanted it to be cut because by cutting, you also make a demand on the minister and on the government to rectify the problems which we would have identified. We did not ask questions because we have discussed this matter, for the last 8 months, and we are quite aware of the deficiencies in the public security sector, and we were not prepared to go over the old ground again. And in fact, a strange situation emerged in the National Assembly, in which two government MPs, Manzoor Nadir and Odinga Lumumba, were the ones who were asking most questions. So the whole drama was contrived. It was like a show that two government people were, going through the pretense of asking questions of one of their colleagues. Well, of course, the whole thing was a display of insincerity.
Okay, all right. The next organization that cuts were instituted to is the Specialty Hospital. But before I talk about that, I want to come back to Jean and NC. Well, not Jean so much, NCN. One of our MPs had posed, I think it's MP Christopher Jones, would have posed a question to the minister asking whether the number of staff members would have been the same as that it was in 2012, in April of 2012. And the response was yes. Basically, yes, the number was the same. I mean, we have people walking around. We know people who know others who were actually hired within that period. Are you concerned that we'll see a repeat of what would have happened regarding NCN in 2012? And like I said, we know that we may not have it on the proof on paper, but we know that persons were hired since the last cuts were instituted. How do you handle that?
Well, what may have happened is that the Minister of Finance or somebody working on his behalf might have allowed monies to be paid on the mistaken assumption that the budget cuts were invalid. And we will take this matter to the National Assembly, because if such an action was taken, it would have been in contravention of a decision of the National Assembly. I think one thing the public should understand, that over the last 15 months, a Partnership for National Unity, more than anyone else, has struggled to ensure that the authority of the National Assembly is preserved and that the accountability of the ministers is adhered to. The ministers are accountable. When they get up in the National Assembly, they must speak the truth. And when a motion or resolution is brought against them, that resolution has to be obeyed. If that is not so, what's the purpose of having a National Assembly? We see a situation last June in which the president is reported, I think he might have been addressing an assembly of the women's arm of the PPP, in which he threatened not to assent to bills which his party didn't agree with. That's not his job. He's the president of the whole country, he's not president of the PPP. And there will be problems if we go along this line. And as far as the budgetary cuts are concerned, if we find that the minister has behaved improperly, he's going to be disciplined by the National Assembly. Now, coming back to the NCN in particular, we did cut the NCN budget. NCN raises its own funds because it operates as a quasi-commercial entity. It sells advertising and it raises millions of dollars. The point is that if the subvention that we had obstructed was actually given, somebody will have to answer. So if people were being recruited, I don't doubt, but if they were being paid for by government funds, that would be a serious breach of the National Assembly's resolution, and there's going to be disciplinary action. I would not like to speak about a specialty hospital at this point in time, but as far as the rest of the budget is concerned, when we make a cut, when we remove money from a particular sub-item or a particular line item, that is binding on the administration. And whether it's specialty hospital, whether it's NCN, whether it's Gaisuku or GPL, the government cannot pick and choose, because at the end of the process, at the end of the budgetary process, there has to be something called an appropriations bill. And that appropriations bill is an instrument legalizing the expenditure from the contingency fund. That is authorized by the National Assembly. You cannot spend money unless it's appropriated by the National Assembly. So the budget comes in several parts. One is the presentation of the budget by the Minister of Finance. Two is the debate on the presentation by the House. Three is the Committee of Supply, which is what we're doing now. And finally, there's the appropriations bill. That after all the cuts and changes have been made, it is put in the form of a bill, and that bill is passed. And that is what authorizes expenditure from the contingency fund. So if anyone is in breach of that, it's like committing a breach of the law.
All right. Is there room for consultation and negotiation even after cuts have been instituted?
We have this week met with the President twice. Last Friday, I wrote to the President in my capacity as opposition leader, and I wrote a joint letter with Mr. Kamrad Ramjatan, who is the leader of the Alliance for Change. And as a result of those letters, we met with the President on Monday and again on Wednesday. We were quite aware that it was budget season, and we wanted to ensure that the President was aware of some of the demands of the two opposition parties, APNU and AFC. So we never closed the door to negotiations, and we hold ourselves ready to resume those negotiations. Now, once a measure is taken, there could be some remedial action in the National Assembly. Very frequently, I think, on our procedures, once a matter comes up for discussion and decision is taken, it cannot come up again. But there might be measures, there might be ways and means of ensuring that monies can be restored. So it's not unlawful. It's something that we've never really considered before. But even so, money could be spent from what is called the contingency fund. There's a consolidated fund which provides the funds for the entire government expenditure. But there is a contingency fund which allows monies to be spent for in certain circumstances, for example, for emergencies. You can't have a budget debate every time there's an emergency. There might be a plane crash or there might be a flood and you need money like right away. Obviously, the government's hands can't be tied. So yes, we could have some move towards the restoration of cuts.
You were sued, to use ordinary language, that is, you were sued about 4 times in 2012, is it? Are you concerned that you'll be sued again this year, maybe several times because of more cuts?
Well, I'm not a criminal, and I don't think that I could be, that any action could be brought to me, proving that I had behaved improperly. So I'm not afraid of being sued because I think that the action taken by APNU was correct. I'm not a lone ranger. I work with a shadow cabinet. I work with 25 other MPs, and I get advice from lawyers. So I am confident that we're doing the right thing. So I'm not worried about being sued.
Mr. Granger, you would have declared the 2013 year for youth, and I know that's one of the things you campaigned on during the 2011 elections. Are you satisfied with the monies that have been allocated to the education ministry, the education sector, especially regarding training for teachers?
Well, overall, no. Education is the most important element, in fact, in the budget, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of human development. And only yesterday, I was at the University of Ghana campus at Turkine, where there was an interfaith service to observe the 50th anniversary of the entry into law of something called the ordinance, the bill, or the ordinance which set up the University of Ghana 50 years ago in 1963, 19th of April 1963. Now, I mean, there were 2 persons of the university staff who were actually moved to tears during that service because, I would say because of the plight of the university. Because it wasn't tears of joy, I can tell you that. There might have been tears of rage or frustration because the university has some very serious problems. And people who attended that university, people who worked there, are very devoted to it because some of the problems they see are preventable. And I say this because that is where young people are trained, and that is where the future of Guyana lies, in the education system. So at no part of the education system did I feel that the budgetary allocations were adequate. And it's young people who will be affected most in the education system. And I was very unhappy because previous week I had gone to some hinterland locations myself. I went into Anai Secondary School, and when you see the conditions under which this new generation of Guyanese should be educated, you wonder what is going to happen to them. And what happens in the budget also, the budget debate, is that there is very little examination of the conditions which need to be remedied or rectified. As a result, you don't know, nobody spoke about the rate of dropouts, nobody spoke about the rates of failures, nobody spoke about problems that we know exist in the education system. We know that there's violence there, we know that there are gangs, we know that in one particular place, a so-called prank nearly killed a teacher. We know that there are pregnancies, teenage pregnancies, and there are all sorts of problems in the education system. So when you talk about allocating funds for young people in the education system, you have to wonder if these people are from Mars. I mean, are they not addressing real problems and seeking solutions? Okay, you can say so many $1 billion have been spent. It is an expensive ministry. And I have no doubt that that level of expenditure is necessary. But what I would like to say is that it is not enough. It is not enough. The University of Ghana, although the allocation, I think, might have been 1.7 billion, it's nearly double what was given last year. It is not enough. There's no point stating that, look, I gave you, a half glass of water a week before the last, and now I'm giving you another half glass. It's just not enough. And I think we need to look at the education in a different way. We need to look at the youth problem in a different way. It's not whether you can afford to give the youth so much money. Can you afford not to give them? Can you afford not to give them? And that is the problem I find. Enough money has not been allocated to youth culture, to sport, to organizations, to education, and to all of the things that concern young people. And we need to take a different look. The budget tends to be very routine, very mechanical. Oh, last year they got 1.7, okay, give them 1.9. Without examining the actual need. And I think if there was a careful study of the schools in this country, people would come up with different conclusions. They may close some of the schools. They may create more laboratories. I've been to these places. I've seen children who are anxious to learn. But when you go into the laboratories, it's like Mother Hubbard's cupboard. They're empty, People have to bring stuff from home because they're so badly funded, so badly equipped, so badly staffed. So my criticism of the expenditure in the budget, the estimates in the budget for youth, are that A, the funding is inadequate, but B, it is misdirected. It is misdirected. It is quite possible that the amount of money could be better spent. But I am sure that in most cases, apart from paying salaries, repairing buildings, in most cases the money is not going where it is needed. It is needed at Cyril Horticulture of Education, it's needed at the University of Ghana, and it's needed to develop the science, technology, engineering, and mathematical side of our education system.
If I can ask you quickly, sir, during the estimates for the Youth Culture and Sport Ministry, we heard someone heckle from the floor that David Granger didn't consult the PPP or government when he declared that 2013 should be the year for youth. If you can quickly shed some light on that, because it comes back to APN, you accusing government of not consulting, and now you're being seen as you just did this without any conversation.
My consultation takes place continuously with the people of this country. I do walkabouts, I go to villages. I went into Lusignan, I went into Friendship, I went into Suramo, Waweta, Aranaputa. I speak to people and they tell me things, So I am aware from direct consultation with the people that there is a serious youth problem in this country. And I would ask anyone who criticizes me to disprove that. There is a youth problem. The Director of Prisons, Mr. De Erskine, said that 75% of the inmates in the prisons are young people. What more evidence you want? There is a problem. Why are they trying to sweep the problem under the carpet? Why are they trying to hide from reality?
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, sir. This has been another edition of The Public Interest. We were chatting with Brigadier the Honorable David Granger, leader of the People's National Congress Reform and leader of the opposition. Until next time, I am Malaika Ramsey. Goodbye.